On a warm September evening in 1952, in the quiet town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, something fell from the sky that would change the lives of 7 witnesses forever and become one of America's most compelling, unexplained mysteries. What began as a simple investigation of a crashed object on a hillside farm transformed into a terrifying encounter with a creature that defied all rational explanation. A being so bizarre, so otherworldly, that even today, more than 70 years later, researchers and skeptics alike struggle to make sense of what happened that night. This is the true story of the Flatwoods Monster, a tale of courage in the face of the unknown, of a small community thrust into the national spotlight, and of a mystery that refuses to be solved. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the most incredible tales are the ones that actually happened, witnessed by ordinary people who never asked to become part of history. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. The town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, in the autumn of 1952, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where children played freely in the streets until dark, and where the most exciting event of the week was usually the Friday night football game. Nestled in the rolling hills of Braxton County, Flatwoods was a community of hardworking families, many of whom made their living from the coal mines that dotted the Appalachian landscape. It was a place where extraordinary things simply didn't happen, which made the events of September 12th all the more remarkable. That Friday evening began like any other. As the sun began its descent behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a group of boys were playing football on the playground of the Flatwoods Elementary School. There were 6 of them: brothers, Edward and Fred May, aged 13 and 12, their friend Tommy Heyer, who was 10, and 3 younger boys, Neil Nunley, who was 14, Ronnie Shaver, 10, and Eugene Lemon, 17, who was technically supervising the younger children, though he was enjoying the game just as much as they were. It was approximately 7:15 in the evening when Neil Nunley first saw it. He'd been looking up at the darkening sky when something caught his eye, a bright red object streaking across the heavens, leaving a trail of fire behind it. "Hey, look at that!" he shouted, pointing upward. The other boys stopped their game immediately, following his gaze. They watched in amazement as the fiery object arced across the sky, clearly visible against the twilight. It wasn't moving like an airplane or anything they'd seen before. It seemed to pulse with an inner light, and it was descending rapidly, heading toward the hills behind the May family farm. "It's going to crash!" Fred May exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. The boys watched as the object disappeared behind a hill about half a mile away, near a property owned by a local farmer named Bailey Fisher. They hadn't heard an explosion or any sound of impact, which struck them as odd, but their curiosity was too strong to ignore. Whatever had fallen from the sky, they wanted to see it. Eugene Lemon, being the oldest and arguably the most adventurous, immediately suggested they investigate. "Come on, let's go see what it was. Maybe it's a meteor or something." The May brothers ran to their home to tell their mother, Kathleen May, what they'd seen. Mrs. May was a practical woman, a beautician who ran a small shop from her home, and she was initially skeptical of the boys' excited story. But their enthusiasm was infectious, and she could see through her kitchen window that several neighbors had also noticed the strange object in the sky and were standing in their yards looking toward the hills. "Please, Mom, can we go look?" Edward begged. "Eugene is going to take us." Kathleen hesitated. On one hand, it was getting dark, and sending children up into the hills at night wasn't the wisest decision. On the other hand, if something had actually crashed up there, it might be dangerous, and it wouldn't hurt to check it out. Besides, the thought of a meteor landing so close to town was admittedly intriguing. "I'll go with you," she decided. "But we're taking a flashlight, and if it looks dangerous, we're coming right back down." The group that assembled for the expedition consisted of Mrs. May, her 2 sons, Eugene Lemon, Tommy Heyer, Neil Nunley, and Ronnie Shaver. Eugene's dog, a large and normally fearless hound named Ricky, also joined them, trotting ahead of the group as they began their trek up the hill. The path took them through the May family's property and onto the Fisher farm. The evening air was warm and humid, typical for September in West Virginia, and filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant calls of night birds. The boys chattered excitedly as they climbed, speculating about what they might find. Eugene Lemon led the way with a flashlight, while Mrs. May kept close to her younger son, Fred, who at 12 was the most nervous of the group. They'd been walking for about 15 minutes, following a worn path that led up the hillside, when Ricky suddenly stopped. The dog, which had been bounding ahead with tail wagging, came to an abrupt halt. The hackles on his back rose, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. Then, without warning, he turned and ran back down the hill, whimpering. "Ricky!" Eugene called after the dog, but the animal didn't stop or look back. It disappeared into the darkness, heading home. "That's strange," Mrs. May said, her voice uncertain. "That dog isn't afraid of anything. Maybe we should go back," Fred suggested. But the others were already moving forward, drawn by curiosity and the excitement of potential discovery. As they crested the hill and approached a clearing near the tree line, they became aware of a strange smell in the air. It was metallic and acrid, reminiscent of burning metal or electrical equipment, but with an organic quality that made several of them gag. The smell grew stronger as they approached, and a mist seemed to be settling over the area, unusual given that the evening had been clear. "There's something up ahead," Eugene said, pointing his flashlight toward a large oak tree about 50 yards away. "I can see some kind of light." They moved closer, and that's when they saw it. Resting beneath the oak tree was a large, pulsing sphere of light, roughly the size of a small car. It glowed with a reddish-orange hue, and the light seemed to throb rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The grass around it appeared to be flattened or scorched, and the strange mist seemed to be emanating from the object itself. "Is that a meteor?" Tommy whispered. "Meteors don't glow like that," Mrs. May said, her voice tight with a fear she was trying to suppress for the sake of the children. As they stood there, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, Eugene's flashlight beam swept to the left of the glowing sphere, and that's when they saw the creature. The light caught it directly, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. It was standing beneath the oak tree, partially obscured by the low-hanging branches. The thing was enormous, towering at least 10 feet tall, though estimates would vary among the witnesses in the years to come. The most striking feature was its head, if it could be called a head. It was shaped like an ace of spades, or perhaps a broad hood, colored a dark red or burgundy. The face, if it had a face, was covered by a circular window-like structure that glowed with a greenish-orange light. Some witnesses would later describe seeing eyes within that window, though others saw only the strange luminescence. The body was even more bizarre. It appeared to be covered in a dark, pleated or ribbed garment that looked almost like a dress, reaching down to where legs should have been. But instead of legs, the creature seemed to float slightly above the ground, hovering or perhaps supported by some mechanism none of them could see. From the upper portions of the garment, what might have been arms extended, though they looked more like mechanical appendages than organic limbs, ending in strange, claw-like extremities. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, the group stood frozen, staring at the thing before them. Then, Mrs. May screamed. The creature responded to the sound immediately. Its head tilted toward them, and there was a hissing sound, like air escaping from a pressurized container. The strange mist around it grew thicker, and that terrible smell intensified. Several of the boys would later describe feeling a burning sensation in their eyes and throats. "Run!" Eugene shouted, and the group didn't need to be told twice. They fled down the hillside in a panic, stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness. Mrs. May lost her shoes in the desperate flight, and Fred May fell twice, scraping his hands and knees, but terror drove them onward. Behind them, they could hear a strange mechanical whirring sound and that constant hissing, though none of them dared look back to see if the thing was following. They burst into the May household in a state of complete panic. Kathleen May's hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the phone, but she managed to call the local sheriff's office. Within minutes, Sheriff Robert Carr and his deputy arrived at the house, At 3:12 a.m., she saw a face in the window staring back. The apartment on Cedar Street was my sanctuary. A studio, small but cozy, nestled on the third floor of an old brick building. My window, the largest feature of the room, offered an expansive view of the city's heart, a bustling intersection by day, a shimmering network of light after dusk, and beyond that, the distant, inky blackness of the river. I'd moved there for the view, for the feeling of being part of something vast, yet isolated enough to find peace. It was perfect for me, a graphic designer who lived and breathed urban energy, but yearned for quiet when the day was done. For the first few months, the view was a constant source of comfort and inspiration. I'd often find myself staring out, a mug of tea warming my hands, watching the city slowly quiet down. The night was a tapestry of distant headlights, blinking tower lights, and the occasional mournful wail of a distant siren. I usually went to bed by 11, my sleep deep and uninterrupted, a luxury I hadn't truly appreciated until now. The unease began subtly. So subtly, I almost convinced myself it was a product of my own tired mind. It started with my reflection. Sometimes, when the room behind me was dark and the city lights painted the glass, I'd see a fleeting distortion in my own image. A shadow within a shadow, a stretch of darkness that didn't quite belong. I'd blink, and it would vanish, leaving only my tired face staring back. Just a trick of the light, I'd tell myself. The glass of these old windows isn't perfectly flat. Then, there was the timing. I'm not usually one to check the clock in the middle of the night, but a persistent feeling, a subtle prickle of my skin, would often wake me. And each time, my eyes would invariably drift to the digital clock on my bedside table, its red numbers glowing like a tiny, watchful eye. It was always, unfailingly, 3:12 a.m. The precision of it was unsettling. It felt like an appointment I didn't know I had. I started to dread that hour. As midnight approached, a knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach. I'd pull the blinds down, thick blackout blinds that I'd installed myself, hoping to seal off the night to keep the outside out, but the feeling persisted. I'd lie awake, rigid, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant drone of the city, and the frantic thump of my own heart. The very air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken anticipation. One particularly cold Tuesday night, exhaustion finally won. I must have dozed off, because I woke with a jolt, a sudden, breathless gasp that tore through the silence. My eyes snapped open, immediately darting to the clock. 3:12 a.m. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and immediate. My gaze, against my will, was drawn to the window. The blackout blinds were still down, seemingly secure, but a tiny sliver of light, almost invisible, leaked from the bottom corner where they didn't quite meet the sill, and in that sliver, a shape. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was a distortion in the darkness, a deeper shade of black that seemed to hover just beyond the glass. It was indistinct, formless, yet I felt its presence with an intensity that stole my breath. It was as if the night itself had condensed into a singular, observant mass, focused entirely on my window, on my apartment, on me. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs, threatening to burst. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate, childish plea for it to vanish, for the world to return to normal. When I opened them again, it was gone. Only the faint, ambient glow of the city filtering through the tiny gap remained, a mocking reminder of what I had seen. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, blankets pulled up to my chin, my mind racing, trying to find any rational explanation. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. My overactive imagination, fueled by too much caffeine and not enough sleep, perhaps a touch of lingering stress. But the terror was too real, too visceral, a cold, hard stone in my gut. The incidents escalated. The blinds, no matter how tightly I drew them, no matter how many clips I used, seemed to have a will of their own. I'd wake at 3:12 a.m. to find them subtly shifted, a new gap appearing, just large enough for a sliver of the outside to creep in. Sometimes it was a tiny crack at the top, like an eyelid opening. Other times, a wider opening near the middle, perfectly framing a section of the dark park below or a distant building. Each time, I'd reseal them with trembling hands, my dread growing exponentially, feeding on my dwindling sense of security. Then came the tapping. Faint at first, a soft, insistent tap 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 against the window pane right at the level of my bed, just beyond the glass. It was rhythmic, almost playful, yet utterly terrifying in its implication. It only occurred after 3:12 a.m., once I was fully awake and staring at the clock, my heart racing. If I moved, it stopped. If I closed my eyes, I could still feel the subtle vibration of it through the wall, through the very air, a ghostly percussion. It knew. It absolutely knew I was awake, and it reveled in its knowledge. I started leaving the lights on, bright, harsh lights that chased away the shadows, but the tapping persisted, a silent defiance of the artificial glare, a high-pitched sound cutting through the electric hum. I'd try to drown it out with music, loud, pulsating beats, but the sound seemed to cut through everything, a high-frequency intrusion into my sanity, a tiny pinprick through the fabric of my reality. My sleep became almost non-existent. My days were a blur of fatigue and anxiety, punctuated by the growing dread of midnight's approach, a countdown to another terrifying encounter. My work began to suffer. My designs lacked inspiration. My focus was shattered. My friends noticed. "Emily, you look terrible," my best friend Sarah said over coffee, her eyes filled with genuine concern. "What's going on? You're never like this." I mumbled something about a demanding project, about the city noise, about the pressures of a busy life. How could I explain that my window, my beautiful view, had become a portal for something unnameable, something that was systematically stripping me of my peace, my sanity? One particularly humid Wednesday night, I had taken every precaution. The blinds were triple-checked, taped down at the edges for good measure with industrial-strength tape. Every light in the apartment was on, burning brightly, creating a fortress of artificial illumination. I was trying to work, to distract myself, to prove that I was still in control, but my gaze kept straying to the window, to the impenetrable barrier of the blinds, a wall between me and whatever lurked beyond. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. A fragile hope began to bloom in my chest, a desperate, foolish whisper of optimism. Maybe tonight. Maybe it would finally stop. Maybe it had given up. Then, at precisely 3:00 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just a dimming, but a rapid, almost frantic strobe, plunging the room into momentary darkness, then harsh light, then darkness again, a chaotic, disorienting dance. My breath caught in my throat, a choked gasp. I stared at the main light switch, expecting it to be faulty, but it was solid, unmoving. The flickering intensified, a chaotic dance that made the shadows writhe, grow, and shrink in terrifying rhythm. My eyes, involuntarily, were drawn back to the window, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. The blackout blinds, despite being taped, despite every precaution, were now open, not shifted, not askew. They were pulled apart, forming a perfect, symmetrical rectangle like a carefully chosen frame, and in that frame, at precisely 3:12 a.m., I saw it. A face. It was pale, almost translucent, luminous against the profound darkness of the park, an impossible beacon of horror. It was elongated, impossibly thin, with hollow, sunken cheeks and a jawline that seemed to stretch unnaturally, dislocated from any human form. The skin was smooth, featureless, like old porcelain, or perhaps the surface of an ancient petrified egg, but for two enormous, perfectly round black eyes that absorbed all light, all hope, all joy. They were unblinking, unfeeling, ancient, an abyss of indifference, and they were fixed directly on me, a gaze that pierced through my very being, stripping me bare. It wasn't outside. Not exactly. It was pressed against the glass, but not on it. It was within the glass, or perhaps the glass itself had become its medium, its terrifying canvas. Its features seemed to ripple and distort with the faint reflections of my brightly lit apartment, the harsh overhead glare illuminating its horrifying stillness, as if it were a part of the window, a terrible, living stain, a malignant growth. And then, as I stared, paralyzed by a terror that stole my very voice, freezing the scream in my throat. Its mouth opened. It wasn't a human mouth. It was a perfect, seamless black circle, like a void, a bottomless pit of hunger, and from it, a faint, wet slurp echoed, a sound that seemed to come from inside my own skull, a sound of sickening, insatiable hunger, a sound that promised to consume. I screamed. A raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat, shattering the silence of the night, shattering my own sanity into a million irreparable pieces. I stumbled backward, tripping over my chair, sending it crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. My eyes remained fixed on that face, that impossible, indifferent face, until my vision blurred with tears of terror, hot and stinging. It blinked slowly, once, its black eye expanding and contracting like a grotesque pupil. Then another wet slurp echoed as the features seemed to melt back into the glass, receding, dissolving, and the perfect rectangle of the blinds slowly, impossibly drawing themselves shut, sealing off the horror, but not the memory. I fled the apartment that night. I didn't pack. I didn't even grab my phone. I just ran. Down the 3 flights of stairs, out into the deserted street, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement, my lungs burning, screaming for air. I didn't stop until I reached Sarah's apartment, bursting through her door, incoherent with terror, pointing wildly at my own reflection in her hallway mirror, as if the face had followed me there, as if it could emerge from any reflective surface. Now, I live in a different city, hundreds of miles away, in a ground-floor apartment with no windows that face anything but a solid brick wall. I keep the blinds permanently drawn, heavy, opaque barriers that provide a semblance of security. And I have a pathological fear of glass, especially old reflective panes, avoiding storefronts, mirrors, anything that might offer a glimpse into the other side. I sleep with a dozen lights on, every single one blazing brightly, and I never ever turn them off, not even for a second. The sound of traffic, of sirens, of human voices, is a constant, necessary balm, a cacophony that drowns out the quiet whispers of memory, the echoes of that terrible hour. But sometimes, when I'm alone, and the city finally quiets down to a low, distant drone, and the hands of the clock creep past midnight, I hear it. A faint, distant tap, 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 no longer coming from a window, but seeming to emanate from the very air around me. A soft, wet slurp that makes me gag. And the chilling, undeniable sensation of a pale, unblinking face staring at me, through the brick, through the drywall, through my very soul, waiting for the precise moment of 3:12 a.m. Because some things aren't meant to be seen. And some things, once they see you, never forget, never truly let go. Every night at 3:33 a.m., the same knock returned. The first time it happened, I was half asleep on a borrowed mattress in a bungalow on Ashbury Avenue, the kind of place you rent because it looks honest from the curb. Haddon, Ohio rolls up early, but the neighborhood still hums at night, freight on the river bridge, a dog testing its courage, the soft pulse of a distant train horn. My phone glowed 3:33 a.m. on the nightstand. The digit repetition snagged my attention. That's when the knock came. 3 taps, not loud, knuckles on hollow wood. From the front door, I held my breath like a kid hiding under a blanket. Another 3 taps, the same spacing, the same careful touch. I waited for a voice to follow. Wrong address. Sorry, car trouble, something human. The house gave me nothing. After a minute, the refrigerator kicked on and the AC exhaled, like the rooms had made a decision to ignore it. In the morning, I checked the porch. Dew on the rail, a menu from the pizza place wedged under the mat that hadn't been there the night before, no footprints. I told myself it had to be a drunk neighbor. Or the wind. Or a branch. I told myself a lot of things, because that's what you do when you don't want the simplest version, a stranger at your door at 3:33 a.m. Night 2, I double-locked the deadbolt and slid the chain. I moved the shoe rack and leaned a chair against the knob. At 3:33, the same 3 taps. The chair whispered an inch on the hardwood. Something in my spine did the same. I kept perfectly still. The knock didn't come again. Night 3. I decided to be brave. When 3:33 hit, I slid out of bed,
and walked to the door as quietly as the floorboards let me. My heart was too loud for the room. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The porch lamp was off. The streetlight across the way made the yard look like a stage no one had set. I cupped a hand, called out, "You okay?" Silence. I waited. Then, without thinking why, I knocked 3 times on my side of the door. Light. Exact. Just to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. The reply came from the other side. 3 taps, the same spacing, the same weight, like a recording of my knuckles played back to me a beat late. I stepped backwards so fast, my heel hit the baseboard. The chain rattled. A dog barked down the block and didn't know what it was unhappy about. When my breath found me, I said to no one, "Don't do that again." The door didn't answer. On the 4th night, I didn't wait. At midnight, I slept in my old sweatshirt with my keys in my pocket like a person ready to run. I told myself I wouldn't get up if I heard it. At 3:33, 3 taps. The same return knock. I lay there and counted my pulse until my body stopped trying to sprint while horizontal. On the 5th day, I met Mrs. Dwyer, my landlord, in her kitchen 2 doors down. She slid a lease addendum across the laminate and asked if everything felt in order. I mentioned the late-night knocks like a joke. Her face did a quick flicker there, then gone. "Kids," she said, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't need. "Sometimes you get a group that thinks they're clever. Ding-dong ditch. It will pass." She didn't ask what time. That afternoon, at the hardware store, I bought a simple door camera and a new chain with longer screws. The guy behind the counter name tag said, "AL told me his cousin swears by motion lights. Makes people act right," he said. "Or at least go try someone else." I installed the camera before dinner, tested the feed, watched my own porch in grayscale until I felt foolish. At 3:33 a.m., the camera sent a push notification. "Motion at your door." I watched live, no one there. Then, the 3 taps. The phone speaker caught them. The waveform looked like footsteps on a flat beach. I rewound. There was a shadow a beat before the sound, a darker slice where the glass pane in my door showed the porch. It was nothing, if you wanted it to be. It was something if you didn't. The next night, I tried an experiment. At 3:32, I stood on the inside of the door and knocked a different rhythm. 2 quick, 1 slow. Tap, tap, tap. I waited. At 3:33, from the other side, came 2 quick, 1 slow. Tap, tap, tap. The same weight, the same distance between taps. Not imitation, reflection. Like my door had turned into a surface that throws back whatever it's given a little later from a place that doesn't belong to here. I told Maya about it at the diner on East Ferry, where I pick up the lunch shift. She listened with that tilted head she uses on sad regulars and unreliable exes. "You're gonna tell me you've been sleeping," she said, and smiled without humor. "Or you're gonna tell me hadn't got interesting." I showed her the push notifications. 3:33 exactly, 3 nights in a row, the little camera icon stamped like a dare. She handed the phone back and said, "Nobody believes witching hour stories. They believe patterns." On night 8, the knocks didn't come from the front door. They came from the bedroom closet. 3:33 lit the screen on my phone. I was already awake, eyes on the numbers. From the closet, 3 taps. Knuckles on hollow wood. Not the frame, the hollow inside. I sat up too fast. The room teetered politely and righted itself. The closet door was closed. The light under the door, none. The smell in the room changed. Old linen, cold iron. I said no, in a voice so dry it could have been a page. The knock didn't repeat. I got up and dragged the dresser across the floor until it pressed into the closet trim and scolded the legs with a wobble. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I found an access panel behind a loose baseboard in the hall, the thin, square paint applied like the memory of a color. It had been there the whole time. I pried it with a butter knife and felt tiny splinters argue with my fingers. Inside the wall was a shallow pocket of dust and old air and a folded envelope. The paper was soft as cloth. My name wasn't on it. The handwriting was all angles, written with a pen that had wanted to be sharper. If you knock, it will knock back. If you answer, it learns you. Do not return what it gives you. We tried everything. Moving, ignoring, praying. It knows 3. 33 because we taught it. If you must hear it, let it be the last time. Under the note was a Polaroid of my front door from years ago. Same glass, same porch rail. The timestamp was just the month and day, but the shadow in the glass was familiar. A darker slice where something stood that refused to register as a person. I stopped knocking back. Night 9, 3:30, 3 taps at the front door. I lay frozen. No reply. Night 10, 3 taps at the bedroom window. The shade breathed in and out like a sleeping animal. I did not move. Night 11, 3 taps at the bathroom door. I was awake, sitting on the edge of the tub because the hot water and the white tile felt like control. The knock came as if my house had learned which room held my attention and decided that mattered. I whispered, "You don't live here," and immediately felt ridiculous and immediately felt less alone. On night 12, I lost my temper. My father says stubbornness is a family hobby. At 3:33, when the knocks came from the hall closet, 3 taps, precise like good punctuation, I opened the door. I don't have a better explanation than this. The dark inside seemed deeper than what a closet can hold. The air was colder by a degree you could feel on your teeth. I said, "I'm not playing with you," and shut it gently, firmly. The 3rd tap landed as the latch seated on my side. Like a hand had finished the gesture for me. My stomach did a small, slow roll. After that, the knocks spread. Not louder, not faster, just more patient. The kitchen wall by the table, the headboard, the floor near the bed. Always 3. Always 3. 33. If I fell asleep on the couch, they came from the firebox. If I stayed up in the kitchen, the pantry door breathed and then remembered not to. I stopped telling people. When you talk about a thing, you feed the part of it that wants your mouth. Mrs. Dwyer texted me one afternoon asking if everything was still settled. The word choice made me feel like a lake. I wrote back, "All good," then typed, "Did the last tenant knock?" then deleted it. Later, in the yard, she mentioned a man named Holland who had lived there decades earlier. "He worked nights at the river plant," she said, tying up tomato vines with her bracelets chiming. Wrote notes to himself, the kind of man who keeps a schedule like a religion. After he passed, the house still felt timely. That make sense? I said yes because I didn't know what else to do. I put down rugs, I added a second chain, I wedged felt between hinge and jamb so the doors would have to commit to moving. I told myself it was just a habit in the bones of a building, like light through old glass making rainbows you didn't ask for. I told myself a lot of things. On night 19 at 3:33, the porch camera finally saw a shape. Not a face, a gap. A place where the image failed briefly, person-shaped in front of the glass. The knocks came, soft on the inside of the door, as if the house had turned itself around when I wasn't looking. I watched live on my phone and felt the floor under my feet like a boat. Then, this is important, I did nothing. I didn't approach, I didn't speak. I let the minute roll over me like a small wave and die on the shore. The shape evaporated across the pixels. The knocks didn't stop after that, but they weakened. 3 soft taps, like a memory of knuckles. A week later, 2 taps. Then, silence. I slept 7 hours in a row and woke with tears in my eyes, embarrassed and grateful and angry that my body had played the role of courtroom witness for so long. On the first quiet night, at 3:33, the ice maker snapped and dropped cubes, and I laughed too hard for the hour. I told the empty room, "That's more like it." The room, in return, did nothing. It felt like a victory. There's an odd thing you don't expect. When the knocking stopped, I missed the certainty of it. Terror is terrible, but predictability gives you something to push against. In the new quiet, my mind tried to invent taps where there were none. I would hear a truck hit the seam on Ashbury, and my heart would sprint. I would tap the counter with my fingertip without meaning to, and hold my breath waiting for the reply that didn't come. Months later, on a storm night, thunder sat on the roof and rattled the dishes, and I woke 3:33 on the phone to 3 knocks. Not the door, not the walls, The headboard. Soft. Familiar. I put my palm flat on the wood and said, I don't return knocks anymore. The fourth tap never came. I still live on Ashbury. The porch camera sends me motion alerts when a raccoon with too much confidence decides to argue with the trash lid. The Friday night crowd stumbles past around midnight when the bowling alley closes. I sleep with the door chained and the hallway light off. Sometimes I take out the envelope from the wall and read the note I didn't want to believe. Sometimes I imagine the man who wrote it sitting in the same kitchen chair, deciding which version of his life to feed. People ask if I ever figured it out. I don't tell them about the recording of my own knock coming back through a door that forgot what side it was. I say the house was settling. I say the camera was glitchy. I say I was tired. Those are all true in their way. This is also true. If you knock, something will decide that you owe it the knock back. If you answer, it learns you. If you stop, eventually, it goes looking for someone who still believes doors are just doors. And when the night leans on the porch rail and tests its weight at 3:33, I keep still, let it knock, let the minute pass, and let the house return to the business of being a place where a person can finally sleep. The face in the mirror moved before she did. The first time the face in the bathroom mirror moved before she did, it was 12:11 a.m. In a third-floor walk-up over a thrift store on Maple and 6th, where delivery trucks made the sidewalk tremble before dawn and a soda machine coughed coins at odd hours, Evelyn Cross had left the light above the sink on low so the apartment wouldn't feel like an empty theater. She woke thirsty, padded in with the kind of steps you take in someone else's house even when it's yours, and reached for the glass turned upside down by the faucet. In the mirror, Evelyn's reflection lifted her hand, and then Evelyn followed. It was small, a beat out of order, like a dubbed movie with the sound just wrong enough to itch. She froze. The bulb hummed. The old fan in the window ticked twice. She tilted her head left and watched her reflection tilt first by a fraction, landing a breath before her. A joke, she told herself. Fatigue. The kind of trick your brain plays when it thinks it's smarter than your eyes. She waited, counted to 5, then shut the light and went back to bed. At 2, 3, she was still awake, listening to the downstairs cooler humming in the thrift store and the freight train that stitched the south edge of town together, thinking about how odd it is when something familiar becomes slightly misfiled. Morning tried to make sense of things. It was rent day, and Mrs. Wynne from the thrift store was already outside, tapping a cigarette into a paper cup at 8:02. A woman who had chosen floral cardigans as a uniform and never looked back. Evelyn carried an envelope and a smile. You getting settled? Mrs. Wynne asked without looking up. Bathroom light flickers? Third floor's got a mind of its own. It's fine, Evelyn said, because the word fine is how you ask a room to behave without admitting you're asking. On the way back up, she paused by the display in the front window. Yesterday's haul had been arranged into an accidental altar. A varsity jacket that smelled like gym air, 3 porcelain birds, a stack of Reader's Digests that would never be read again, and a full-length mirror in a wooden frame with a thin nick like a healed scar along the left side. The price tag said $25 in green marker. She caught her reflection in it, crooked ponytail, dark circles, then the fluorescent inside buzzed, and her reflection looked at her a breath before she looked at it. She told herself she'd imagined it. She paid anyway. The guy from the back, Marcus, easy smile, forearms like he moved furniture for sport, carried it upstairs because the stairs were narrow and gravity, here felt like a suggestion. He propped it against the bedroom wall. Found it in an estate lot, he said, dusting his hands. House up on Miller Ridge. People with money and ugly wallpaper. You want me to anchor it? I'll manage, she said, because the need to be capable is a hard thing to put down. That night, she brushed her teeth, watching herself like a witness. The man, 56 p.m. The mirror paid attention. She lifted the toothbrush, the other hand lifted first. She shook her head. The reflection argued with a slight no before she could get hers out. When she leaned closer, her reflection didn't. It waited, and when she was almost close enough to fog the glass, the face in it smiled. Evelyn did not. She slept with the bathroom door shut and a towel under the crack, because that's what the body does when the brain is short on good ideas. Tuesday, she met Raina from 3B in the laundry room, the kind of neighbor whose whole personality fit inside the phrase, "I hate this dryer." Evelyn almost told her about the mirror, got as far as, "Do you ever feel like?" and then shook a knot out of a pillowcase instead. Raina checked her phone. "This building's haunted by the guy who used to own the bakery," she said. "Diesel coffee breath. You'll know if he likes you, your bread rises. If he doesn't." She made a flat gesture with her palm. "My muffins died yesterday." Evelyn laughed, relieved to borrow someone else's story. She did not bake. She ate grocery store sushi over the sink and told herself she was too tired to be nervous. Wednesday at 12:28 a.m. The mirror found a new trick. She stood in the bathroom doorway, made a fist, and held still. In the glass, her reflection opened its hand, and then Evelyn's fingers followed, obedient as a student. She tried to catch it by being quick. A snap, a clap, a sudden lean. The figure in the mirror anticipated each move by the smallest breath, an unsteady metronome that thought she wouldn't notice. She took a photo on her phone. The image looked normal, as if photographs were loyal and mirrors were not. She turned on the shower and watched steam climb the corners of the glass. When she wiped a circle with her palm, the reflection wiped clean a beat before she did. Then impossible letters formed in the fog from the mirror side, someone else's finger dragging through condensation with a slow deliberateness that made her stomach drop. "Don't turn off the light." She left the bathroom light on and did not sleep. Thursday, she pulled the mirror off the bedroom wall, turned it face down on a blanket, and went to work at the community clinic where she filed forms for people who never got a straight answer anywhere else. She told herself she was silly. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she would take the mirror back to the thrift store and get her 25 and buy groceries with it. After dinner, she propped it up again because something in her needed to see what it would do. At 1:17 a.m., sitting on the edge of the bed, she raised her right hand. The glass raised its right hand first. She said hello to an empty room and heard from behind the glass the faintest exhale, like someone on the other side had tried to say it with her and missed the timing. At 2:03, the fluorescent in the bathroom buzzed and stuttered out. Darkness poured across the tiles. In the mirror, only in the mirror, the bathroom stayed lit. Her reflection stood under a light that didn't exist. Eyes wide, mouth shaping a word. Not help, not run. Something longer. Then the bulb flared back, and the image snapped into sync, like nothing had been caged behind the glass at all. Friday was delivery day at the thrift store. Evelyn went down to ask Mrs. Wynne where the estate came from, as if anyone ever gets an answer that makes them happy. That mirror? Mrs. Wynne squinted at a clipboard. Miller Ridge lot, like Marcus said. Older couple, daughter in from Phoenix, sold the whole house in 2 days. The woman, what was her name? She wasn't well. She tapped the paper as if it would remember for her. They had mirrored closets everywhere. Gave me the creeps. Evelyn found Marcus unpacking lamps from a banana box. The mirror? Anything weird when you brought it up? Weird, like it was heavy, he said, smiling. I don't look at mirrors at night. Bad policy. Why? No reason. She lied. That night, she placed a strip of blue painter's tape across the edge of the mirror and the wall half on glass, half on paint. If the mirror slid, the tape would tear. At 12:41 a.m., the tape tore in a perfect line. The mirror hadn't moved. Her reflection raised a hand. Evelyn didn't. She angled her phone toward the glass and switched to video. The screen showed her face, and, one breath before it, another. She backed away, heart pounding in the way that belongs to children and certain animals. The recording captured a tiny flicker at the corner of the frame, as if a shoulder had leaned out and leaned back, and when she played it again in the morning, the flicker was gone, as if the file had adopted the store policy of not looking at mirrors at night. Saturday, she bought a new bulb for the bathroom, a heavy frosted globe that promised calm. She bought batteries for the flashlight because she wanted to be the kind of person who owned batteries. She bought command strips and anchored the mirror so it would not be tempted by movement. At 11:58, she texted her mother and deleted, "I think something is wrong," and typed, "love you" instead. At 1:03, the building settled. At 1:11 A truck on 6th took the light too fast and made the window shade thrum. At 1:27, the mirror's face broke into a smile that did not reach the eyes, and Evelyn's mouth stayed still. The person in the glass lifted a finger and slowly, gently made the shape of a no. Evelyn turned her head. Because if someone tells you not to look, you look. Behind her, in the dark of the doorway, something stood just outside the bathroom's bloom of light. Tall enough to own the top half of the frame, still enough to be an idea. She didn't scream because her scream was a small animal that had hidden in her ribs and wouldn't be coaxed out. She stared at the mirror instead. Her reflection stared back. The shape in the doorway did not step forward. When the clock slid over to 1:30, the hallway remembered itself, just scuffed paint, the taste of dust, a shadow that knew how to behave. "Don't turn off the light," the mirror had told her. She left it on. Sunday, she stayed out late at a diner on Pine Street where the coffee tastes like hope and the pancakes are a little too sweet. The late shift server knew her name without asking and refilled her cup without comment. Outside, the crosswalk button stuck on walk, and the street sounded like a weather report for tires. When she climbed the stairs, the building felt like a person who'd been holding a breath and let it out when they heard her at the door. She brushed her teeth with the light on. She held up her left hand, then her right. In the mirror, the motion came first, like a teacher with a lesson, and then hers trailed, learning. She pulled a stool from the kitchen and sat in front of the mirror with a notebook and wrote down times like she was a scientist and not someone trying to convince herself she could be believed. 12. 7 reflection leads by a beat. 1. 27 doorframe shadow. 2. 3 bathroom bulb lies. 2. 44 silence like a thought. She wrote until the letters stopped looking like English. At 3:12, the face in the mirror mouthed her name. It was clear this time. Evelyn. She drew closer. The glass breathed cold into her skin. "What do you want?" she whispered. The face in the mirror frowned, lifted both hands, and pressed its palms flat to the inside of the glass. Evelyn matched it. The chill slid into her fingers like water. The reflection shook its head again. Soft, urgent, then glanced toward the doorway with a look that did not belong to glass at all. She turned. Nobody. Just the hallway and the distant cooler downstairs pretending it was an ocean. She turned back. The mirror was empty, just the room, the door, the blank rectangle where a person ought to be. Then her own face arrived, a fraction late, as if she had climbed into it. Monday morning, she took the mirror off the wall. She laid it face down, fixed a towel over it with tape, and leaned it behind the dresser like a secret you promised to keep.